Hello, everybody on Skool. It is Nikki here with Breathe and Be Free Breathwork and Mindfulness. We are on the second video here in the classroom series on the breath, the basics, the 101, and we're talking today a little bit about breath mechanics. I just wanted to really invite people to have an open mind. Sometimes these things can challenge our narratives and how we think we know or how we've been attached to knowing things about our bodies, about life, etc. So, if anything, some of the things that are spoken about and some of the content that's here definitely does reflect that. But certainly, it's important to recognize that keeping an open mind and coming in with a mindset of maybe I'm here to learn something new, right? That is the just the way that we can play with life and enjoy it. Yeah, and so what I wanted to talk about today was sort of just about how the mechanics of the breath works. So I'll kind of talk a little bit from my own experience, and then I'll also talk a little bit about some of the pieces around the mechanics and just recognizing as well that everybody's journey is going to be so different. So the ways that we can breathe and tune into our bodies is going to be much different than everyone else's, but ideally with the mechanics and the science behind everything, it relatively does end up being the same. Yeah. And so, as far as mechanics of the breath, so traditionally, people for a long time had thought the air comes in, like it's coming in through the lungs, coming into the lungs, and, it's basically like we're taking a breath, the air is coming in, and we're taking the breath, and it's just leaving our body, right? Like, when you think about it on a basic level, and you don't have any science behind it, you might think, oh, well, I'm actually like taking in the breath and, my lungs are expanding, right? So that is interesting. And certainly there is some merit to thinking about that because logically, it feels like there's an expansion and there usually is an expansion going on, but that isn't the whole story. The one thing I wanted to share a little bit today around the breath is that, when we take that inhale, when we breathe in, right? There's a lot of physiological changes that can happen in our body. And the one thing that I've noticed with my own experience is that I've had to really rewrite the story of what I thought was breath. So maybe we can do that together and really talk a little bit about that as time goes on in the classrooms and in the discussion here on the Skool page. Yeah, and so really, when it comes down to it, when the air comes into our bodies through the process of inspiration and expiration, we're inhaling and we're exhaling, what happens is that there's actually a pulling of the diaphragm. There's a diaphragm in the torso. We have our pelvic diaphragm, we have our thoracic diaphragm, we have our shoulder diaphragm, and there's even this awareness of having like diaphragmatic function in our head, in our neck, in our back. These are all things to be aware of, that the way that we think of the diaphragm isn't just one-sided. There's many layers to that within the body. And that specifically, when we take a breath, our thoracic and our pelvic diaphragm, everything that's basically between the upper rib cage all the way down to the pelvis, there's a lot of activity going on there. So when we take a breath in, and I invite you as we're talking and as we are sitting here and you're taking in this information, maybe just exploring that a little bit and seeing what it feels like to take a breath and feel a little bit more expansion. So, yeah, just an invitation. And what I really like about the mechanics of the breath specifically is that there's so much of an ability for us to explore different parts of our body that may not have really felt familiar to us. So, a good example of this is that, and I'm just going to move this down a little bit. So we have our rib cage right in here. And as we take a breath in, you see how there's that opening, right? I'm not pushing my chest out, but it's like, it's an opening going on. And what's happening is that as the diaphragm is pulling downward and allowing that air to come in, like we're breathing in, but the air is actually being entered into the lungs by that pulling of the dome-shaped muscle known as the diaphragm. This area right here, It's a huge muscle, right? So when this is happening, we actually also get an expansion, a slight expansion of the ribs, and we actually get a lot of movement of our organs and essentially any contents that are right here in our abdomen going downwards towards the pelvis. And the neat thing about this is that there's a slight engagement of the pelvis as we're making that breath happen, as the breath comes in, as that pulling goes down. There's sort of like, it's almost like a slight opening and closing of the pelvic floor. So, how many people have talked about it is that there might be sort of like a little bowl or a little hammock. And so, when you're breathing, it's almost as if the breath comes down, that diaphragm is pulling the air into the lungs, all of the abdominal contents are going down, and there is an engagement so that essentially when you're breathing and then the breath is being exhaled, there's a relaxing and a contracting of that pelvic area. So keep in mind that the mechanics of the breath are actually working in tandem with each other within the body. So even without much communication, it's almost as if there is a response and a movement. It's a very in time movement. It's something that is just so fluid and so consistent that your pelvis and your diaphragm and your lungs aren't all necessarily communicating with each other. But what is happening is that there is a physical mechanical process that is allowing all of those things to expand and contract in perfect harmony. So, of course, leave it to our bodies to just be the most incredible, beautiful things that are even here on this planet, right? So, and really just to emphasize as well, too, is that, that pushing downwards, it's creating that space for that expansion of the lungs and for as much air as is possible to come in through that bottom area of the lungs and to really just deepen whatever breath you might be taking, whether you're wanting to take a deep breath or maybe there's just a little bit of breath that wants to go in that lower part of the lungs. Like, we get that opportunity to open and to have that room and that movement to do so. And what I really thought was fascinating about this when I was first learning about everything around the breath, around the mechanics, is that, there's this sort of relaxing position that happens, as soon as our body is exhaling. It's like it knows when it's time to relax. And I think it's really fascinating that in the same way that the mechanics can show up for us and essentially show us that, if we're able to just let the process happen naturally, then all of the functions are going to happen as they're meant to happen. It's the same thing with our nervous system. It's the same thing with, how we show up in our daily life. I think in the last video I was talking about how essentially we have to be really mindful of the other breaths that we are taking outside of our breath practice, right? It's not just about the practice. It's about all of the other moments outside of that, right? So in this same example, the way that we're breathing and the way that the mechanics of our body are really being able to show up for us, it really determines how we can be functional in our lives. And as well, too, just to note that these pressure and space changes, right? All of the space that becomes available, all of the pressure that is essentially being brought into that area around the abdomen, and our ability to draw the air in and having, essentially a lot of chemical exchanges happening in the body, this can really help us in a lot of ways. So essentially, just getting into this a little bit more, there's a lot of research around how the exchange of CO2 and oxygen can actually create things like different environments in the body that can support either a healthy nervous system, a regulated nervous system. It can help us to essentially become more resilient to things in our environment. And also, and this isn't necessarily like a constructed, this is confirmed, but people that I know that do breath work, like they've really noticed that when they do end up getting sick with a cold or something like that, it seems to not impact them quite as intensely as they may have previously. So, just keeping in mind that, our body is really going through these chemical changes, but it's really giving us that adaptation at a cellular level to be able to be supported fully, whatever comes our way. So, and yeah, so that I just love that. I love that we have the opportunity and the capacity to explore this, and that we are able to really, just feel into what our body needs, but also recognize that there are mechanical processes happening to breathe fully, to really give our bodies the opportunity to expand and contract. And just like we have in our daily life, expansion and contraction of our lives helps us to grow as people. It really helps us to understand the process of how we are living, like if we're living out of alignment, if we're living in a space that feels really sticky and really challenging, maybe our breath is really telling us something here. And maybe as well, like I know people that they have a lot of confidence issues, and they're really, I find that even when they're sitting, or just their positional or postural, sitting positions are really telling of how their breath must be functioning, because they're kind of arched downwards. They're, this part of their body is kind of hunched forward. And so the diaphragm, the, intercostal muscles around that diaphragm and the back body, it's going to be a lot more challenging for those areas to be breathed independently if we are working with postural misalignments. So keep in mind that some of these mechanics are also impacted by things like, if we have any kind of, back issues or injuries, scoliosis, if we have postural challenges or anything that's out of alignment. And as well, something that I was just talking about was, those energies of, I'm not feeling like confident enough to really just like, proudly shine my chest forward, like, and that's part of that alignment too, is that if we're able to take a full breath, it's almost like we feel safe enough to take that breath and to be able to trust the breath coming in. So it goes beyond, beyond the mechanics in a way, because when we're talking about how are we showing up in life, well, that's a great example of being able to expand our ability to show up just by changing how we might be sitting, or how we might be addressing the world, how we might be looking at ourselves in the mirror every day. So, this is definitely, it goes beyond the breath, like I've been saying quite a few times. Breath is really such a deep dive. It's like the breath is the ultimate iceberg, where you might think, oh, breath work, this is so interesting, and what we breathe every day. Yes, we do. And there's so much yet to be explored. There's icebergs all over the world that nobody's ever seen underneath them. They don't know how far down they go. And I think with our own experience, it's important to keep an open mind with that, and just to recognize that we may not know the depths within ourselves and some of the things that we may be navigating. And how beautiful is it that we have some kind of, technique or process, or just something that we can use that may support us in exploring those depths within ourselves. So take this as your sign to start going within a little bit more and seeing what's possible. So, yeah, and I was going to say as well, just a last little piece here around how we can move forward, and how essentially this course is going to move forward. What I really want to, share with anybody who's here, and just, what they really want to explore within their breath experience is, being willing to continue with this, really just go through the Freedom Through Basics course, see how it fits for you. If you feel like you really want to continue moving forward, there's going to be other content offered here. There's going to be other things to explore. And I highly recommend, if you haven't yet, or if you haven't, ever done anything like this, is to schedule a free breath assessment. You can schedule one with me, and we can talk about the breath and how your specific breath mechanics could be limiting things in your life, and how we can help you to correct those things and just to adjust them in a way that is more supportive of how you can show up in your daily life. So yeah, if you're really interested in that, feel free to reach out. You can always post a comment in any of the feeds on the classroom. And yeah, I mean, that's all I really want to share about mechanics. But before I go, I'd really love to just take you through a little bit more of the mechanics and just give you a real time look at how that works. So yeah, I'll just show you here really quickly. Okay, so essentially when we're taking a breath, and I'm just going to put my hands here on my waist, when we're breathing in, we really want to keep ourselves pretty neutral here. And as we are taking our breath, we really want to make sure that we're keeping ourselves relaxed here in the pelvis, and just keeping in mind that we do have this back body we can also breathe into. So I'll take a breath in. Okay, so that's all I really wanted to show you there with the mechanics, and really just to keep in mind that when you're breathing in and breathing out, seeing how far you can take some of those inhales and exhales. There will be other content that shows you a little bit more about the different things such as cadence breath, which is basically just counting, inhaling for 5, exhaling for 5. There's a few other breath techniques that we'll talk about later on that wouldn't be included in this exact classroom, but I just want you guys to get into the awareness of breath and into the awareness of how it feels to take a breath in, take a breath out, and be more conscious with it. So thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. Let me know how it goes, how your experiments with your own breath mechanics are going in the chats. Would love to hear from you. Thank you for being here on the Skool Network for Breathe and Be Free. I'm just having a blast over here. So much fun. And I hope you are too. So let's see you guys again soon. There'll be another video up probably next week sometime. The next one is about how we breathe, how we feel, essentially the physical changes that happen during breath. I really want to go on a bit of a deep dive with this one. I'm going to get into some sciencey stuff, so if you're not into science, just check mark it off. But I really think that the physiology and the sort of mental health side of how breathwork can support us is really fascinating, and I have a feeling you're going to like it too. So thanks, and have a great rest of your week.